people laid down their citizenship rights based on ethnicity. The country of Israel is a state in which half the population exists on one tier of citizenship, and everybody else that's ruled by Israelis exists on another tier, including Palestinian Israeli citizens. The only people that exist on that first tier are Israeli Jews. Why do we support that? Why is that okay? I'm the child of Jim Crow. I'm the child of people that were born into a country where that was exactly the case, of American apartheid. I walk over there and I walk through the occupied territories and I walk down a street in Hebron, and a guy says to me, I can't walk down the street unless I profess my religion. I'm with another path. No. I want to. This is very, very important.
It is important.
It's extremely important.
Yeah, let me lay it down.
I'm working with the person that is guiding me is a Palestinian whose father, whose grandfather and grandmother was born in this town. And I have more freedom to walk than he does.
Why is there no agency in this book for the Palestinians? They exist in your narrative merely as victims of the Israelis, as though they were not offered peace at any juncture, as though they don't have a stake in this as well. What is their role in the lack of a Palestinian?
I have a very, 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 very moral compass about this. And again, perhaps it's because of my ancestry. Either apartheid is right or it's wrong.
Book. I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups?
World in me. But in this new book, you go to 3 different places. You write about your trips to 3 different places, to Senegal, to South Carolina, and to Israel, and to the Palestinian territories. You've already gotten a lot of attention for this book, some of it quite heated, it has to be said. But I want to start where you start in the book, which is Senegal. I mean, this is your first trip there. You describe these feelings of real disquiet while you were there, sort of fear, just sadness, and a kind of a heaviness. Can you just describe why, or what it is that you were feeling, and why you think you were feeling that?
You know, I'm of the generation of children born in, I guess, the 70s, and maybe it started in the late 60s, where it became popular to give your kids African names, and to really, raise children with, different views and different notions of Africa and different ideas of Africa. And that effort really was to overcome a very racist telling and stories of what Africa was, and thus to justify treatment of African Americans. And that in turn was counted with different versions of history, some of them themselves quite mythical. But here I was confronted with the real thing. No more stories, no more narratives. This is it, buddy. This is actually what it is, and I was going to be crafting stories on my own, to say nothing of the fact, which I actually think I took for granted, that this really was, in some profound way, as cliche as it is, the motherland. Like that was really where I was going. And so I was terribly affected, and maybe I was not totally prepared to be affected.
Can I throw something out, or were you afraid that you would be disappointed?
Disappointed, no, because of the age I went. Because of the age I went. And I understand why a lot of people are afraid by that. But actually, as I'm reflecting on your question, maybe I was. One of the things I talk about is lurking in the back of my mind was, what if all of those racist narratives were actually true? That's terrible to admit. But certainly that was in the back of my mind, as something that was haunting me. I didn't expect to be, welcomed with drums and, welcome home, brother.
Brother, yes.
No, I didn't expect any of that. That wasn't what I was looking for. But like I said, it is terrible to admit. Perhaps I feared that I would not find a city in Dakar of human beings.
That is a hard thing to admit. So what do you think you found there that is important to the overall narrative that you're sharing in this book?
The first essay, and I guess we'll talk about this in a minute, and the last essay are kind of in conversation with each other. When you've had a horrific, violent event happen to you, such that it really, breaks lineage and breaks time. How do you reconstruct yourself? How do you reconstruct yourself in a way that is truthful, reflects your ethics, tell the stories that you really feel like embody your sense of justice? I think there is great temptation when you suffer through an experience like we have, and the humiliation that comes with it, to go completely in the other direction, and maybe ignore some of the reality that actually makes you a human being. Senegal.com was really my opportunity to confront some of those stories and some of those ideas that actually I was raised on myself, that I embodied in my very name, actually.
In story, I guess, as you would say, in story, they were embodied in story, and that story kind of infiltrated you in ways that you perhaps were not really aware of. So then, May of 2023, you visited Israel and the Palestinian territories. So in the book, you draw parallels between Jim Crow America and the Israeli occupation of these territories. You called it separate and unequal, alive and well. You say it's a place where the glare of racism burned more intensely than anywhere else in your life that you had ever seen. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about why you say that.
There are two sides to me. While there's a part of me that does not like, mixing it up and, fighting with people, there's also a part of me that says there is something dishonorable and actually unloving about witnessing certain things that you think are important and not saying anything about them. The fact of the matter is, I went to the old city of Jerusalem on 2 different times. The first time I went in the way that typically Palestinian Muslims go, and we were held for about 45 minutes by armed guards before they, gave us entrance. There was no reasoning.
You went to Al-Aqsa, the Al-Aqsa
Mosque, and no reasoning was given or anything like that. They just held us just because they could. And then when I came back, in the way that an American tourist might come or a Christian typically might come, it was so easy. I just breezed through. It was the easiest thing in the world. And this, control of time and space extended out into the West Bank, where, there are roads for Palestinians and then there are roads for Israeli settlers, which immediately set off my chart. You got 2 different roads for 2 different classes of people. So that immediately sets off alarm bells for me. You're seeing in the territory, and you can see one place where settlements are and where settlers live. And they're marked in a certain way. And then you can see other areas where they're Palestinian villages and hamlets and where they live. And you can see that these are completely separate. You go to the old city of Hebron, as I've talked about, and there's streets where I am allowed to walk down if it is made clear to the guards that my mother was a Christian, that I am a Christian, and that my grandmother was a Christian. But my Palestinian guides do not have access to. That's just in brief what I saw. I saw much more. But that sets off certain things for me. And then I came back and had to do the reading and the research on top of that to understand the governance and the structures that are beneath that make that possible, and in some ways mandate that. And I was left with the conclusion that, in fact, what I was witnessing was separate and unequal. That it was, the closest that I would see in my time to the Jim Crow that my parents were born into.
So is there a point at which you said to yourself, I can not only just see this, I have to write about it and accept whatever comes with my writing about it in this way? Was there like a pivotal moment, or was that always the plan?
That was always the plan, but I knew by saying I'm gonna, I just knew this is gonna be hard. This is gonna be
And
rough.
what's hard? Say more about what's hard. What is hard?
I don't like hurting people's feelings, man. And that sounds, I'm kind of laughing, but it's actually true. I don't enjoy telling people unpleasant things. To be really, I guess, direct with you, there are people who I have had in my life who I care about, some of whom have been colleagues of mine, I've spent very intimate time around, whose feelings this will hurt. Have a very, very different view of the state of Israel than I do, have ties to it. I believe that what I witnessed was an immoral apartheid regime. Those are my conclusions. That's what I say in the book. I don't take saying that lightly. I would rather not feel like I have to say it, but I did based on what I witnessed and what I read afterwards.
So your core conclusions are, it's an apartheid regime. the life there for Palestinians is unbearable. It's unbearable. It's demeaning. It's dehumanizing, and it's morally unjustifiable. Would that be?
That would be
Someone.
correct. That would be correct. And I just I want to add two things to that. The first thing is this I know this word apartheid is harsh, and it's one
It's
that
fraught.
yeah, it attracts a lot of debate. I don't want people to think that I'm just throwing that around casually. It was not just what I observed. It was reading the reports of Amnesty International, where they made the case for apartheid. It was reading the reports of the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, where they made the case for apartheid. It was reading Human Rights Watch and their reports. It was reading the reports of Al-Haq. It was actually doing that. It was actually reading the words and the quotes of people like former Prime Minister Ehud Barak or Ehud Omar, and them warning that Israel was in fact tipping into apartheid. That is really what it was rooted in. So I know that is a heavy word for a lot of people, but I don't want them to think that I'm just sort of casually, lobbing grenades for the heck of it.
So let me go into just some of the criticism of the work already. The book is just out, but a lot of people have already read it. Some of the criticism is you went for 10 days. You went for 10 days. This is a nation state that has existed in its current form for 75 years at this point. But these are people who have indigenous claims to this land for centuries. You have not just the Palestinians have indigenous claims to this land, but also the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, have indigenous claims to this land. And these borders have moved back and forth for centuries. This is one of the things people often criticize journalists for. They say, well, you go someplace for 10 days and then you're entitled to tell the world about it. So what do you say to that?
What I say to that is there are things that we hold at our moral core that we witness that context, 600-word books, reports, even more time won't make okay. There's nothing that I can imagine that I will see that will make it okay that one group of people lives in a settlement and another group of people lives in a village, and there is perhaps a half a mile between those two groups of people, and one group has direct access to water and the other does not. There's very little that I can imagine seeing. There's nothing that I can imagine seeing that allows for a society in which there are tiers of citizenship, and at the top tier of that is a group of people, be they Jewish or whoever, but in this case, because it's Israel, they Jewish who have the top tier of citizenship, and everyone else is something less. There's not something that I would have seen in 30 more days. And I will add that even that criticism is familiar to me. Because in fact, during the civil rights movement, what white Southerners would often say is, you white Northerners who come down here stirring up trouble, you don't know the Negro like we do. You haven't been down here. You don't live down here. You don't really know what it is.
You don't understand the situation.
You don't understand the situation. But if you ask the black folks there, they would tell you you understand it perfectly. And so I just I get it. I get that, I would like to know more, would like to do more, but I can't help but feel that if I had a different political perspective on this, the very people who are criticizing my just, only going there for 10 days, would think 10 days were actually quite enough.
The other criticism is you did not include in the book people who defend the government. In fact, you criticize the idea of what we have started to call both siding the issue, especially in journalism. But I still want to ask you about your unwillingness to include, for purposes of this report, other views, because, we are constantly being instructed, especially in this very polarized time, that that's fundamental to empathy. And if we don't at least engage in that practice, that we're not being true to that fundamental value of trying to see other people as human. So how do you answer that?
The first thing I would say is the pro-Israel point of view, the Zionist point of view, those who view the Zionist project as a good thing, as a moral thing, as a just thing, they are not unrepresented in the vehicles of American media, in our newspapers, in our magazines, in our television shows. That viewpoint is not unrepresented. On the contrary, it's one that I was very much exposed to. And what the purpose of that last essay really is I am someone who went somewhere and saw something and came back struggling with how it could be that what I saw was so different than the story that I was consuming in my media on a regular basis. And I really wanted to understand why. And I thought that the way to do that, my tool for doing that, was to privilege the words of those who I believe have been, unjustly pushed out of the frame. And that is, the Palestinians. My feeling is that many of the publications that would lodge that criticism would do well to look at their own bylines and count how many Palestinians they've published over the past 10 or 15 years. And so it is quite rich to me that I am being criticized, or that I would be criticized, for not talking to people who would defend what I believe to be an unjust order, in publications that I think are actually part of how that order maintains itself. When you don't allow people to speak, when you don't allow them a place, not just in your individual work, but in the entirety of the conversation, it becomes a lot easier to do things to them.
I'm wondering if, though, is the fundamental problem here that one faith group is privileged over other faith groups, or because that is not unique to Israel. Israel is not the only country that privileges one faith group over another faith group. Is the fundamental problem here that Israel is seen as different, that Israel sees itself as different?
I just want to make sure I'm not excluding a very important group of people, and that's Palestinian Christians, who I interviewed some of and felt as discriminated against as anybody else. There's a incident I described happening in Hebron where I'm asked my religion, but what was very interesting about that? I was also asked my mother's and my grandmother's religion. And when you start asking that, you are asking something besides, do I accept Jesus Christ as my personal savior? There's something deeper going on. There is great evil in this world, and I am wary of singling, Israel out as somehow singular or more evil or whatever. But the point I would make is that I am responsible as an American, and particularly as a citizen of a country that takes somebody like Martin Luther King as its patron saint, that walks around talking about, with great pride about the triumphs of the civil rights movement and equality. How can I then go to a country where we boast about our special relationship with and see a two-tiered society, literally, where citizenship is decided by ethnicity, religion, and rights are decided by ethnicity and religion, and then just say, you know what, there's a lot of other evil in the world too, and turn my back. I just don't have that in me to do that.
Before I let you go, and I've been struggling to find this passage, but this is when you were walking at Yad Vashem, which is the memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. You say that it hurts to know that in my own writing, I have done to people that which in this writing I have inveighed against, that I have reduced people, diminished people, erased people. I want to tell you that I was wrong. I want to tell you that your oppression will not save you, that being a victim will not enlighten you, that it can just as easily deceive you. I learned that here in Haifa, in Ramallah, and especially here at Yad Vashem. So this is another story about writing, about power, about settling accounts, a story not of redemption, but of reparation. Who are you talking to?
Myself. But I was talking to my students. I think that your imagination has to be slightly ahead, and maybe even more ahead than the present politics. And I think there is great, great danger in thinking that because you lack power in a particular moment, you don't have the ability to hurt and damage other people. I am not in that case making a narrow critique of Israel or of Zionism. This is, I think, a very, very human impulse to think that because you went through some horrific experience, you therefore have a kind of moral authority and are therefore then not capable of inflicting horrors on other people. And as much as I feel like I saw that, you know what I mean, in my travels over there, I was talking to us too. I was very much talking to us too. And I think that was like really important for me to say.
Came out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away. The content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist.
Backpack.
And so then I found myself wondering, Why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long
I mean, are you kidding me?
It's his latest book, The Message, is in bookstores now, and he joins me now. Good to see you, man.
Good to be back.
Back at it.
Good to be back there, too.
Yeah, well, I'm going to start with this from the book, because I think it sets up our conversation and all the conversations people will see you having over the next few weeks. You said the late Jamal Khashoggi, the murdered writer from Saudi Arabia, was fond of the Arabic proverb, say your word, then leave. I try to live by that because I am at my worst out there defending, you say my children, which are your books, defending my books, and I'm at my best making more of them. This part of the gig, I think, is your least favorite.
Well, being here with you is not. The thing I was actually thinking of was this sort of discourse that happens when writers write what they write, and then somebody replies, and then the writer decides that they need to clarify. I've engaged in that in the past.
It's a trap a little bit.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's really helped me.
Well, but part of what makes it hard, and part of this book, as much as anything, and someone asked me the other day, I was raving about it, and they said, what's it about? And that was brought up a little short.
Right, you just stop, right? You and me both.
Well, it's as much as anything, it's a love letter to writing.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It's a love letter to writing.
Yes.
And part of what comes through is that the work that goes into the clarity of writing is almost impossible to do in any other medium.
Yeah, and that was like a really, really important thing for me. I think people forget that, in an era where, obviously video is so important being here. But I think people really forget that at the base of it, somebody has to write something down, and, when I was teaching at Howard University, which still am teaching, which so much of this book comes out of, the thing I was trying to impress upon my students is, even if all of you don't go on to be essayists, poets, fiction writers, the process of learning to express yourself with clarity is valuable. It's valuable no matter what you go on to do. The things that I try to do, in the extreme, in order to write a book like that, is no different than the things I try to do when I'm trying to write a memo or email.
There are 3 essays in this book. The one that I think is probably going to get the most attention.
Dakar.
Yeah, exactly. How'd you know? Most attention and the most controversy and the most discourse is about your trip to both Israel and Palestine, to the West Bank and Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. Just start by talking about your way into that story. Like what, you write a little bit about that in the essay, about a few lines in the case for reparations that you felt like maybe you were glib about a history that was much more complex.
I think glib is the correct word. When you're writing something radical, as it was at the time, in 2014 for the case of reparations, you're really always trying to ground it in some sort of real thing so that people can perceive it. And in the case for reparations, it was reparations, and I want to be very clear about this, from the state of Germany to the state of, actually West Germany to the state of Israel. Not necessarily directly to Holocaust victims.
Right.
I neglected to ask a very important question, which is, what is the nature of that state? Because for me, the case for reparations was not simply about compensation for something that has been done, but about making the world safe from a particular kind of oppression at large. And as it turned out, as was very clearly revealed to me when I did my travels, to use the state of Israel, reparations to the state of Israel as an example, actually undermined the very message of the thing I was trying to get across in the article.
And why is that?
Because Israel's an apartheid state. And I don't mean that as a slur. I mean that in repeating the reports of Amnesty International. I mean that in repeating the reports of the Human Rights Campaign. I mean that in reporting the reports of the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem. I mean that in reporting the fears of Israel's own prime ministers, Ehud Barak, Ehud Olmert. And I mean that in terms of what I actually saw, which was a society in which half the people live and have the benefits of full citizenship, and the other half live on various tiers somewhere below that. This was immediately clear to me the first day I got there. And certainly by the second day when I was walking through Hebron and I literally saw streets where certain people could walk down and certain people couldn't, where I could walk down as long as I was clear that I was not Muslim,
and other people could not. When it was made clear to me that I was with a group of people and spending time with a group of people who, should they fall into any sort of trouble or get into any sort of trouble, would be treated by the military justice system, while all around them were Israeli Jewish citizens who were subject to the benefits of the civil system. You can imagine the difference in the degree of harshness there. And it went on. It went on. It was pretty clear across the board in terms of the laws and the policies.
I've been on those same streets in Hebron and had the same reaction, which is that this is obviously a moral abomination.
Obviously.
But I thought about your case for reparations essay because the gap from the case for reparations is on, to me, irrefutable and rock solid moral footing.
Yes.
It is the case that American wealth was built on the plunder, that there is something owed. From that moral certainty to the, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Things do start to get more complex.
Yes.
And from the moral certainty of standing on a street in Hebron to, this is not morally acceptable,
right,
to, how do we have 15 million people between the river and the sea with full equality, peace, and flourishing? That is more complex.
Yeah, that is. But you know what? In many ways, the next step is a lot clearer to me, in fact, than actually it was the case for reparations, because the other thing I was confronted with was the extent to which Palestinian voices have been completely pushed out of the frame. So the first step is actually an easy one, to elevate, the voices of the people who are actually having the experience and ask them what should happen here, and not, one or two of them, but in some sort of mass way. In many ways, that essay is about my complex relationship with journalism, which I love, which is a process I love, which is one that I actually applied right there. But I have to tell you, and I've said this and I'll continue to say this, I would be very interested in how many major media organizations have a bureau in Jerusalem where they have a Palestinian correspondent or bureau chief. I would love to see those numbers. Obviously, I think, anybody should have the opportunity to work that kind of job, just like I think anybody should have the opportunity to cover race in America. But if there were no black people doing it, or very few, we'd have a problem with that.
It's interesting you say that. Let me just stop for a second. It's interesting you say that because I thought about you choosing to write about this topic. I thought of a conversation that you and I had before I wrote my second book, A Colony and a Nation, which is about race and policing and the criminal justice system, in which we were just talking as friends, and I was like, I don't know, I want to write this book, but is it a little weird for a white guy to write this book? And you were like, well, you're an American. It's it's your story as much as anyone, so you should write about it. And, in the case of this, neither you or I are either Jewish, Israeli, Palestinian, or Arab. Mm-hmm. But we're Americans, and America is not some small part of what's going on over there.
No, we're a large part of it, and it's marked everywhere. There's an essay I talk, an exhibit I talk about City of David where I went to, where there's an actual plaque that thanks America for its support. I was recently reading a report by a Palestinian-American scholar, Nora Erekat, and Josh Paul, who resigned from the State Department. And one of the points they made was every plane that drops a bomb on Gaza was gotten from here. Those are our bombs. We're responsible. And that's what, a lot of times the pushback is, well, look, there are bad things happening, all over the world. Why particularly are you picking on this one thing? I'm picking on because I'm responsible. Yeah. Because it is the presidents of this country who have said, we have a special relationship with Israel. So if we have a special relationship, then I have to treat it specially, if that's a word, especially maybe. And so that to me was what, very much called me there.
I want to talk about some other things then, but I want one more point on this. The thing that I have already started to see people say about you, and the thing that I think you will see a lot of, will be basically of this form. Mm. That you're well-meaning but naive, smart and curious, but essentially got led on a very one-sided sort of propaganda tour, a kind of Potemkin tour, in which the full complexity, you could have been taken to Surat and you would have met Israeli families living under rocket fire, right? Mm-hmm. You could have, this all happened before October 7th, but you could have been taken to Israeli victims of, brutality and terrorism and things like that. And that you came away with this very one-sided image from this one-sided experience.
Well, I'll say two things. The first thing is, it is very, very difficult to spend almost 30 years in media as I have and not be very much exposed. And frankly, to live in America and be a thinking person and not be exposed to the defenders of the Zionist project. It's just, it's hard to do that. It's all around us. So that was not the thing I was lacking in familiarity with. The second thing I would say is, look, I am against the death penalty, okay? I don't care if the guy slaughtered 10 children and ate half of them. I don't think that person should be killed. There is nothing I would see that would change my opinion on apartheid. Absolutely nothing. My case is not based on a higher or elevated Palestinian morality. It's not based on a notion that Palestinians are somehow angels or somehow morally better than. This is what I believe about human beings. And there's no thing that I would see that would make that go away. I am against segregation. I am against apartheid. I am against Jim Crow. Nothing will make that okay. Nothing they can do would make that okay.
There's a line in the book that I think is kind of the thesis of the Ta-Nehisi Project. You were talking to two, there's an amazing organization called Breaking the Silence in Israel.
Yeah.
Two folks that are Israelis who had served in the IDF and who would then come out later to talk about what they had done and how morally abominable the occupation is. And you'd say they were raised under the story that Jewish people were the ultimate victims of history. But they had been confronted with an incredible truth, that there was no ultimate victim, that victims and victimizers were ever flowing.
This is true of human beings. This is true of human beings. And just like Zionism doesn't represent a particular a Jewish exception or something that is being perpetrated that human beings haven't done before, that humans aren't capable of doing, you don't get an exception from the fact that victims victimize all the time. That is the nature of the thing and something that, frankly, I, as a Black American carrying all of that, presently wrestling with.
I mean, you write about that in The Beautiful Struggle, just at the micro level of your block in Baltimore.
That's right. That's right. That's right. There is no inherent deep nobility. Now I'm speaking of my own people, for having been subjected to enslavement, Jim Crow, et cetera. It's bad. It's wrong. Hopefully it confers some degree of wisdom upon you, but sometimes it doesn't. You know what I mean? And sometimes people just decide, hey, the lesson actually is power. And so I look, that part that you just quoted is actually very, very important to me, because the people you are quoting are people who served in the IDF in the actual occupation. So it's like, what was I supposed to do? I talked to people who were victims of it. I talked to people who did it. Is it that I did not talk to the right people who did it? I'm just not, that's hard for me.